the federal government is trying to deport a lawful resident who has not been accused of a crime. We'll talk about that and some other topics. This is Nuance, and I'm Mike Scala. And I should probably mention I'm an attorney and hip hop artist. Sometimes, actually, never really on here do I say who I am because I figure it's my live stream on my page and people know me. But for the benefit of those who may not know, we do this on YouTube and audio on podcast platforms, etc. So people may not know who I am. Yes, I am an attorney and hip hop artist, and I'm joined by Jay Carter, also known as Timid. He's a hip hop artist and a chair of BLM Tokyo. What's going on, Jay? Scary times here in the U.S.
Yeah, this is really crazy. So this arrest of Mahmoud Khalil really is unprecedented for America and what America supposedly stands for. So we'll get into that, and we'd like to also hear your thoughts. So like and subscribe, leave some messages in the comments below. Let us know what your thoughts are. So what is happening with all this?
Right. So, as you mentioned, it really is unprecedented. And I think we're going to need to separate the politics of it from the law, right? Look at what's happening from a legal and a constitutional point of view here, because you have the federal government now attempting to deport someone who, as we mentioned, is a lawful resident, right? We understand he is here or came on a student visa, right? I think we also saw something that indicated he might have been a lawful permanent resident, but nonetheless, we know that he is here lawfully in the U.S. and has not been accused or convicted of a crime, right? So why is the government now trying to deport someone who's here lawfully, right? Because you always hear people talk about, well, it's one thing to come lawfully, but we are against illegal or unlawful immigration. That's not that category, right? So let's keep in mind this is a lawful resident of the U.S. Again, not been accused of a crime, not been convicted of a crime. So what is going on here? It seems like he is being targeted for his viewpoints, right? He is a or was a student leader at Columbia University and apparently has been involved in protests. We covered here before the large scale protests that were going on really on campuses across the country, but certainly at Columbia. That was kind of a focal point, right? Ground zero, if you will, of all of these protests over what's happening in Israel and Gaza. So the government is classifying this individual as pro Hamas. We're not sure from what we have seen if that's even the case. But again, we need to separate the politics and what we feel, what we think about this from the law, right? Even if, let's stipulate, right? Let's stipulate, just for the sake of argument here, that he has deplorable viewpoints, right? Let's say he was, pro Nazi, whatever the case was. That alone should not be enough to warrant deportation because we have a First Amendment in the US, freedom of speech, freedom, right? And that's not just freedom of speech, it's freedom to assemble, it's freedom to petition, all these things, freedom of expression are all
Right.
part of that First Amendment,
Freedom to disagree.
right? So what we're seeing here is a situation where it seems at face value that someone is being deported for their point of view, or at least that's what's being attempted. Now, we should mention that a judge has put a stop to it temporarily, right? And
Right.
so, like a lot of things, we have to see how it plays out. As of now, it's been stopped as a violation of his rights. But what a scary time to be in the US, given what's going on. I mean, this at first glance reminded me of John Adams way back, right? The second US president with the Alien and Sedition Acts. He only served one term because that was deeply unpopular.
Mm.
Trying to criminalize criticizing the government. That's a mouthful, but that's what they were trying to do at the time. And it kind of feels like we're walking down that path, threatening people with deportation who don't hold the views of the administration.
Right. And that is something everyone should be alarmed about. Because like you said, we're so quick, we're probably well known around the world to be very quick to state we have freedom of speech. Like I think it's probably even a running joke in other countries the way that we scream for freedom of speech and the right to bear arms.
Right. So just on that point, really quickly, I once made a post on Reddit trying to start an intellectual conversation about free speech. And in particular, I was asking people in the UK, right? Because in the UK, they don't, and they do things that kind of surprise us as Americans sometimes. Like you'll see people being quote unquote arrested for racism in the UK. Like that would never happen here, or at least maybe up until now, right? I mean, now we're in a whole new era, but historically, you don't see that kind of thing because of how subjective that can be and how because we understand that we have free speech, we have the freedom to say even things that are hateful in the US. So
Right.
I asked a question on Reddit once and I said, basically what is it like not having free speech in the UK, right? Like if you're in the UK, what is your stance on that? Does that bother you? Or are you comfortable with that idea? Do you want free speech, right? Just trying to start the conversation. And they were not happy that I asked the question. Someone said something like, the stupidity of American teenagers knows no bounds or something. I said, I'm not an American teenager. I'm actually a constitutional lawyer. That's why I asked the question. But they thought I was a kid asking it because they thought it was just such a stupid thing to ask.
But they do have free speech.
They do not.
Huh?
UK has no free speech. People get arrested for their speech in the UK.
For criticizing the government?
No, no,
Nah.
no. Not for criticizing the government necessarily, but for example, people have been arrested for saying racist things in the UK.
Okay. Interesting.
At least what they would consider to be that, right? Again, we don't litigate that. At least we
Right.
haven't. Now we're starting to with this, right? We're going down that path of
This is
yeah,
something different. I think here's
yeah.
the thing is I think if we look at it from probably the conservative point of view, who have been caught up in a lot of hate speech, reprimanding, over the past, I don't know, decade, right? They've been complaining about this idea, when they're getting called out for their hate speech or they're getting banned from platforms for their hate speech, and they're like, "Oh, you're going against our First Amendment rights." So I would assume to them this seems like exactly that, the same thing. Like you know what I mean? Like this guy is getting called out for his beliefs. They believe that they're getting called out because of their beliefs, not that they're doing anything wrong.
Well, we have to again separate the law and the Constitution,
Yes.
our feelings and our politics, right? Our beliefs
Yes.
and our values, all of that. Those are two separate things. Now, sometimes they can be intertwined, but we need to be able to look at them separately as needed. And when people talk about their freedom of speech is being violated because of a Facebook post or something like that, that's not free speech. That's
Right.
private action, right? So the way the law would look at it is if Facebook were not allowed to moderate or to give other people the right to respond back to them or handle it a certain way, that their free speech rights were being violated, right? Because it would be the government stepping in and telling people who can speak, who can't, when you can speak, when you can't. And that's what free speech is. Free speech is the government can't come in and interfere with that. So
Right. And I think
so
just
that's
just
what this is, right? The deportation case now that we're talking
right.
about is a matter of free speech because it's the government coming in and trying to punish someone for their speech, right? Or for their protesting or their
Right.
associations or all their First Amendment rights. So that's the distinction here.
And I think that's why I brought that up so that you could clarify that because I think that is a big distinction that a lot of Americans just don't understand, right? They scream free speech, but they don't really understand what it means in that regard, right? So they think like, Twitter saying or Facebook saying, "Hey, you can't say this on the platform. It's a violation of free speech," when it's not, when it's supposed to be, it's talking about government curtailing your free speech. And a
Right.
lot of them get that messed up.
Right. If the government were to come in and tell Twitter that they had to allow whatever they wanted on there, that would be a violation of Twitter's free speech, right? Or the people who run Twitter. Also, if the government were to come in and say only their viewpoint were allowed, right? Because sometimes people do this as well. If they say something and they get attacked for what they said, they'll say that their free speech was violated. But
Right.
If that were the case, right, where only you could say something, but there would be no consequences from other people responding, then those people's free speech would be violated, right? If the government came in and said, Twitter must allow you to say whatever you want, but people can't criticize that. Like, no, they have to allow, they can't come in and cherry pick who's allowed to speak. Twitter can, right? Facebook can, but the government can't come in and dictate that to people. And again, that's what we're looking at here. We're looking at the government coming in and trying to dictate what's allowed to be said.
Right, right. And that's where there's a big problem.
Yeah.
Now, what's being reported, or some people are reporting that he is on a student visa, which, from what we've gathered here, is incorrect. He's a green card holder. He's a legal permanent resident.
Okay. Is it possible that there have been both issued? Because I'm seeing kind of mixed messages on this. Sometimes I see it referred to as a student visa, sometimes as a lawful permanent resident.
Well, I think initially he probably was here on a student visa because he
All
wasn't
right.
born here.
Yeah,
And I
yeah.
think, right, and I think the you know, that misinformation can really cloud the judgment on how this is seen. But it also can indicate that some people have that viewpoint that they don't care. He's a foreign guy from this certain place, and he must be a
Well,
student. He must be, you know what I mean? And I'm gonna quote here from this AP article.
yeah.
Um, so uh, his attorney, Amy Greer, had spoke on the phone with one of the ICE agents during the arrest, and they said they were acting on State Department orders to revoke Khalil's student visa.
Okay.
And the attorney, Amy Greer, informed them that he was not on a student visa. He was in the United States as a permanent resident with a green card. And the agent's response to her, according to the lawyer, was that they were going to revoke that instead.
So whatever he has, we're revoking, basically.
Right. Right. So it's not even this is just basically we're going to get this guy regardless.
Yeah. Well, and either way, whether it's a student visa or a green card, whatever it is, he is a lawful resident, but not a citizen, right?
Right.
So if he were to be, for example, convicted of a crime, we'd be looking at a different situation here. But
Right.
we don't have that now. What we have is no accusation even of a crime, but
Right.
the threat of deportation on his activities and his viewpoints. And they're saying, right, to be nuanced here and kind of look at what the administration is saying, they're not characterizing it as a First Amendment issue, right? They're not saying he's going to be deported because of his speech. What they're trying to say is that he is affiliated somehow with Hamas, or he is pro Hamas, and that makes him potentially dangerous as far as supporting a terrorist organization, right? And so
Right.
they're taking that approach that this is a potential threat to our safety as a country.
Right. Yeah. So,
Now,
do we want to
no,
go
you would
this?
need more. You would need more because I'm sympathetic to the idea that you don't want someone who's actually going to evade or help terrorists in the country. You don't want that, but that's not what we're seeing even as far as credible accusations go, right? So that's why the story is what it is, because we're
Right.
looking at someone who is facing deportation from what we can gather just over being a student leader at the school and being involved in protests, right?
Right.
We're not seeing anything even as far as an accusation goes that he is somehow planning a violent attack on the U.S. or is even talking to terrorist groups or anything like that, right? I don't even think they're accusing him of even that.
Right. So it's just what's the specific accusation that they have against him?
They're saying that he is pro Hamas.
And that's just to them that's enough.
Yeah, right. So let's look at
To
the want to get the quote because I know Marco Rubio put out a statement on Twitter, right?
Oh wow.
Such a wild society we live in that's even where people make these statements now. But I had it up. Is it in the chat here? I know it was in one of the articles. Let me pull this article up where Marco Rubio was saying he was pro-Hamas. And again, I haven't seen that. And from a legal perspective, that wouldn't matter unless you could tie it to something activity, right? Some kind of plan or scheme to cause violence or to aid and abet actual terrorists, right? We're not seeing any of that. At least that's not what's being reported here. And so when we see it just as a matter of someone is being faced with deportation based on their viewpoint, I think that rightly is going to get people upset. From a constitutional perspective, it screams unconstitutional, and I think we have every right to be upset about that. Again, separating the politics from the law, right? I know there are going to be some people who are going to look at this and say, listen, I don't want that guy in the US because I don't agree with his viewpoints, or I think maybe he can be dangerous if he is aligned with his side or whatever. You know what I mean? People are entitled to that view, but I think we need to be able to separate the viewpoint and the affiliations from what the actual Constitution says, because this is a dangerous path to go down, right? Once you start doing this to him, you can easily see the next step being anyone who disagrees with the administration on some level. You have to put a stop to this immediately, and not even entertain the notion that someone could be deported or punished by the government for their viewpoint.
Right. And that's the thing. It's like, do we want to go there?
Right.
And no. I mean, it should be a no-brainer that we don't want to go there. It's one of the things that we proclaim, or we wear that badge on our chest, that we are allowed to do, to question the administration, to question our leaders, right? To take them to
So
task,
here
to
is
criticize them, to
right.
mock them.
You know, it's sometimes a difficult subject to talk about because people will get emotional about it. For example, if I were to say that you have the constitutional right to be pro-Nazi or pro-KKK or any of these things, right? Uh, People would be maybe upset because we consider as a society those to be deplorable groups, right? Hate groups, terrorist groups, whatever. But
Right.
we have to be able to separate, again, the law from the politics, from our feelings about it. And like we said, we do have free speech in the US, which means that you're allowed to say things and support causes that society may not agree with, or that large segments of society may not agree with, right? That's what free
Right.
speech is. So here's a statement from Marco Rubio. We will be revoking the visas and or green cards, so I don't know, maybe they don't even know, of Hamas supporters in America so they can be deported. So Hamas supporters in America is how they're characterizing it. They're not saying people who are participating in violent plots or anything like that, right? They're just saying Hamas supporters.
Right. You know, it, it's it's really not it's kind of hypocritical coming from Marco Rubio, but then and again, it's also not surprising coming from Marco Rubio because of his, like, I say hypocritical because of his criticism of some of these policies back in the first or the first pre-Trump term, when he was criticizing these types of egregious activities against some of our civil rights and whatnot. But then it's not because he has such a wall up in regards to what happened in Cuba because of his background that I can see where he'd be all for this. Where, okay, well, he's a dissenter. Let's get rid of him. And it
But
just
coming from that background, see, and this is why I keep repeating that you have to be able to separate these things out, because you would think he would be afraid of walking that path, right? That's the kind of thing that you would see in a place like Cuba, right? And
Right.
I get his
To me.
politics are different, but just the idea of you can say something that goes against what this administration believes, and now you're subject to being punished by the government. That's exactly what they were trying to get away from in Cuba, wasn't that?
Yeah, right. You know, um, I mean, I mean, you could take that. It's kind of funny and it's not. And I'm sure we'll get to that a little bit later. But it's kind of reminiscent, not reminiscent, but it's kind of akin to a lot of the Christian nationalists talking about how um, Christianity should be the de facto
Mm,
um, uh, culture and the leader of law in the land, and everyone should follow it. But the original people coming here from Europe, the Pilgrims, were trying to escape that. They came here for religious freedom and
sure.
persecution.
That's
You know,
right.
and now the ones here these days, the Christian nationalists are trying to promote that.
Yeah, we'll talk about that in a
Yeah, we'll
little
get into that a little
bit.
bit later, but it just
There's
kind of
so much that I can say on that. Yeah, like
right.
yeah, that's what's crazy.
But so yeah, so back onto this. So I think some of this is, let's go a little bit into who this guy is. Like I didn't know much about who what is it, Mahmoud Khalil
Mhm.
was. So apparently he took part. We did talk about the Colombian activists, the protests. Some say that he was a significant leader of those, and we've seen a lot of, it's a powder keg. We've seen a lot of issues with this Israel offensive against Gaza and this Israel Hamas back and forth. And it seems like if you take, even if you say that this shouldn't be happening in Gaza, uh, someone on some side is going to take it and run with this idea that you're pro-Hamas,
Right,
even if you said nothing in that regard.
right.
So,
And I think we saw something when we were researching this prior to starting that allegedly there were people who were handing out pro-Hamas leaflets at a rally that this individual was a part of, but it doesn't even specify that he himself co-signed that or saying that or believed in that. Sometimes you get these rallies where people come in with all different points of view, and we can't be painting everyone with the same brush.
right. So according to this article, and this is an article in the Times of Israel, that he attended a protest last week, and I think this is a current article. Let me make sure here. Yes, this was today. It said he attended a protest last week at Bernard College, which is a Columbia affiliate, and during which activists handed out pamphlets from the Hamas media office. So it doesn't say that he was doing it. It just says
Right,
that he was attending this protest where people were doing that. And that doesn't really indict him because again, we've seen that he's been a pro-Palestinian activist. He's taken part in demonstrations. Um, and this could have been him going to another one to try to raise awareness to alleviate the suffering of what's happening in Gaza and in Palestine and whatnot. And there were people, apparently, some people were there, could have been unbeknownst to him, passing out this sort of information.
right. And also, it doesn't really matter from a legal perspective whether he's technically pro-Palestine or pro-Hamas. It can if you start going down the road of, well, he poses an actual threat, right? Like he's
Right.
so tied to this group that now he's going to start committing domestic terrorism. Well, that's a legitimate concern if that's the case. But that, as
Right.
we said, hasn't really been even alleged here. This is really more about his protesting, right? His beliefs, what he said, not what authorities think he might necessarily be doing. Maybe they're trying to imply that on some level, but they're not saying that there's anything tangible. I don't think in that regard, right? And we know that you can't start deporting legally. You can't constitutionally. You can't start deporting or punishing everyone who expresses viewpoints that are in favor of even what we would consider to be a terrorist group, right? That's against what our Constitution stands for. Now, I can say personally, I think anti-Semitism is terrible, right? I'm not
Yeah.
pro-Hamas by any stretch of the imagination either, right? Certainly not. Personally, right? I'm not on that side, but yeah, again, we're talking about this from a legal and a constitutional perspective, and the danger that that poses just to go down that road, right? When you start punishing people, again, you started this conversation by talking about people get free speech confused. This isn't a matter of Twitter or Facebook blocking your post or banning you or whatever. We're actually talking about the U.S. government punishing someone for their First Amendment activities, right? That's a very dangerous, scary, and unconstitutional road to go down.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thankfully, this judge has blocked this action, but the fact that it has got to even get there is really crazy.
Yeah, and it's
And
only a temporary block too, right?
right,
Pending
right.
further action on this. So,
And if anything, there's a I was gonna say a lot of times, people talk about, and I think we've had this conversation before as far as this term a slippery slope, and some people don't really like it, but this is really one of those situations because once you do this once, there's a precedent that's set.
yeah, I think it's more than a slippery slope. I think you slid right into
You think it's
hell.
done already. The fact that
I
it's
think
even brought up,
I think it's a slip and slide. What do you call those?
it's
Like,
not even a slope anymore. Like it's just
well, like you already went
it's a
down.
free.
Like you like at that point, yeah, no, you slid down all the way to the bottom, and
Yeah.
yeah, now you're trying to climb out the hole. That's what that is.
Yeah. I think that's probably more accurate. I mean, because the fact that it's already been brought to, it was already ordered, and a court had to stop, put a temporary stop on it. That means we've already taken the action.
Yeah, no, that means that you ripped up the Constitution. That's really what that means.
Yeah.
So yeah,
So,
and this isn't the only iteration of that we've seen, unfortunately, right? This is the first time we've seen it as far as the administration trying to deport what they would consider to be a pro-Hamas person, right? And they're saying, like Marco Rubio
right.
posting, that there's more to come, allegedly. So this is the first time we're seeing this, but this isn't the first time we're seeing the Constitution be torn up. So
Right.
this is where we are, and we do need legal intervention to put a stop to it.
Yeah. So I saw there seems to have been some demonstrations that were planned to protest what's happening to him. So some people seem to be taking the
Yeah,
activist route
I
to
think
try
there
to.
are already big protests at Columbia over this.
Yeah. Um,
But it's kind of like the cycle ends up repeating, because what's going to happen? People who are protesting this are probably going to get classified as pro-Hamas, anti-Semitic, and all these different things, right? When I would even venture to say there are probably Jewish students who would participate in that because they see the danger in that. I mean,
I would hope so.
so right, you know what I mean? So we may see history where the cycle repeat, in a sense, where everyone involved in that is categorized as the same thing, when there are nuances to this, right, that I think need to be emphasized, that this shouldn't be seen through the lens of, if you want this guy to stay in the country, that means you're anti-Israel, right? That's not what this is about. uh,
Right.
you should be able to put this in a historical context of the Holocaust, for example, right? uh, what is the saying? First they came for, then they came for, right? By the time they came for me, it was
Right.
to stand for me. And so when we talk about free speech, it isn't a matter of only defending people we agree with. It's a matter of defending the very principle of free speech so that we can say what we want to say and not have to worry about those repercussions, even if people disagree, right?
Right.
Person A says something we disagree with. We want to make sure person A can still say that so that we can have our own speech. And maybe our speech is, we disagree with you, whatever it is. We want to make sure that we're preserving that institution, right? Because we consider it foundational to our society.
Right. Absolutely. Um, it's yeah. It's another dark day in America, and I wonder. We saw in this week, and I wonder if this contributed to it. I haven't really gone a little bit deeper into it, but America was placed on a human rights watch list, for international human rights watch list, and we haven't been on that list. Um, because of, and it's we were put on this list because of the eroding rights that Americans are being subject to. Um, and I wonder if this is just another step that pushed us on that edge and just shows that we're marching towards a direction that America was supposed to stand against.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
So let's put the poll out for the people. We wanted to ask about this issue this week. And the poll question of the week is: should lawful residents who have not been accused or convicted of a crime be eligible for deportation? Right. Um, it's important to make that distinction because, look, if the idea here is that this student poses a credible threat, then there are crimes you can accuse and convict him of, right? If he
right.
actually is in some kind of conspiracy to cause harm in the US. Well, that's serious. And no, we don't want people like that here. Like, let's get it straight, right? We don't want people who are going to cause harm in the US. But if we're saying it's only a matter of speech, that's a problem.
Right. Right. And to bring those crimes against him, they would have to have some credible evidence, um, to go forth.
Right.
Now, they haven't put up anything, so we can only assume that they don't have anything against him.
Yeah. And is it a stretch to go from this to people who are, I don't know, what are other controversial issues like bail reform? I'm just like throwing things out. Immigration, right? People who come out in favor of certain positions that may not be popular, but whatever the case may be, they take certain positions that go against whatever the administration is standing for. Is it a stretch to say that, or to predict that they would go from this to, we're going to also, by the way, deport or revoke, visas and green cards of people who hold these other views?
Right. No, it's not a stretch. I think when you're doing things like this, where you're testing these protections, right? It it first starts with a few pokes, right? To see what can get through, what can pass, what can we make happen? And, the more that's done and the more things that get passed, then the bigger the actions become. So, I think this is one of those things. It's a poke. We're going to see what the direction is going to be like going forward over the next 4 years in regards to protections like this.
Right. And that's why you want that person A, the first person they went for, to still be here to stand up for us if they come
Right.
after us later. Right.
Absolutely.
So,
Absolutely.
yeah. Yeah. What a crazy, scary time. That seems to be the motif at this moment.
Yeah, and listen, we are barely over a month in.
Well, I know you watched the Surrounded episode. I watched it too.
The
And I think,
Jubilee surrounded episode. Yeah.
yes, there are similarities. And actually, before we get into that, I did want to mention something that has been bothering me a little bit. And I know people have mentioned this before. I don't even know. Maybe we did at one point. But when you buy tickets to events, these fees that they're hitting you with, especially if you're buying them on secondhand sites, are astronomical. And I think something needs to be done about this from a legal perspective to crack down on it. Because let me see if I can pull up the email here. I just bought tickets to the Mets home opener,
Right.
and I bought them to StubHub, right? Because what happens is people buy the tickets and then they resell them, right? So if you were to go try to get them directly from the Mets, the good tickets will be sold out. Other people have bought them up and now they're reselling on sites like StubHub. And the tickets were expensive, but sometimes you splurge. It's Mets home opener. What really bothered me was the fee, just the fees. They don't even really specify what it is that StubHub hits you with. Let me pull this up. Would you be able to take a guess as to how expensive the fees are?
No, I mean, I, This is what StubHub
Yeah,
gets.
yeah, what they charge us fees. Very vague. Total fees, it says. Here you
I
go.
don't know.
If you look, it's got an asterisk, so the fine print on the bottom includes all applicable service, delivery, and transactional fees. Still very vague. It's just fees, costs, just some shit we're going to add on to the bill.
10%, something ridiculous like that.
More. It was $145.
The ticket was $145.
No, the fees,
The fees were 140. How much were the tickets?
$518.
So are they doing it on a percentage or is that like I'm assuming it's not a flat fee. That's still
No,
crazy.
yeah, I don't know if it's some kind of tier system or it's a flat percentage every time. Let me see. That would be, I think it's like 20%, right? It's actually 28%.
Jesus Christ.
Yeah.
Isn't that like it's almost like that 28% kind of reminds me of usury. Like, isn't that kind of part of the definition? It's like when it's like around 28% or something like that. I mean, I guess it's not the same because it's not extending like credit and whatnot, but like to charge a 28% fee is insanity. But then again, what's the what's the standard promoted tipping rate in New York City right now?
That is true. They say 20% is like the minimum, right? They're pushing more towards 25, 30.
Right. So, which to me is insane as well. But in that context, is this 28% really that crazy?
But why should I be tipping on StubHub?
You shouldn't. Why should you be tipping 20% of the restaurant? You shouldn't. Yeah, StubHub is, you know, that's crazy. I think wasn't Ticketmaster taken to task over excessive fees as well? Oh, looks like we've lost Mike over here. Um, well, I think we're gonna continue here. I think it is pretty dis it's quite crazy. Hopefully we get Mike back on. Um, but yeah, it's quite crazy to have that sort of I don't know, that sort of fee structure. And I think, like I said, Ticketmaster has been going through the same thing, and something needs to be dealt with in that regard. But before we got into this here, we were going to get into the Surrounded episode. So Jubilee is a YouTube channel, and they have these discussions where they get like one person in a field and they surround them with like 20 people that have opposing views, and they try to have a discourse. So this past week they posted up they released a video of 20 Trump supporters versus one progressive, and the progressive was Sam Seder. Um, I'm not really familiar with Sam Seder, but he is a host of a pretty popular podcast. His YouTube channel and the podcast they have over like 1.2 million views. He's also a former actor. And so uh, they had this Surrounded episode. It was about an hour and a half long. And I originally got brought into it because of some clips that were posted on where one woman was straight up espousing views of xenophobic nationalism. She was asking basically, what's wrong with it? You know, why would that be considered wrong to have xenophobic nationalism? Then there was someone asking about DEI and how, they got everything pretty much confused in that regard. Another person was talking about, trans people in the military. And so they were going back and forth having this discussion, um, which, if you get a chance to watch it, I would recommend it. It's interesting, but it's also sad in a way because a lot of these viewpoints were just so far off base, so misinformed, uh, that it was scary in a way because these were people that voted. These are people that, you know, promoted certain ideologies and certain candidates over others, or even certain viewpoints in public. Um, and to see that they were proudly and gleefully promoting these certain views, like this idea of what's wrong with xenophobic nationalism in a country like the United States of America, where Sam Seder pointed out, we are a melting pot. This is what we painted ourselves as, right? Um, a melting pot of all different types of cultures, of all different types of viewpoints, coming together and living together for the common good of the United States of America. Um, this wouldn't have happened. Someone wouldn't have gone on a public forum in video and full-throatedly brought up these viewpoints 15 years ago. It wouldn't have happened, right? We're in such a different space right now.
Right.
So this is interesting. This conversation was interesting and quite enlightening, and scary in many regards.
Yeah. Now, I know a few minutes ago you mentioned that woman who was saying that we have a dominant culture in the US and
Right.
it's Eurocentric and whatever. So,
Now, one thing real quick before that, it seems like not that she was a plant, but this woman apparently is a part of a extremely far right media group who
okay.
this is their whole MO.
Well,
So,
many of the people who are on that series, that YouTube series, are repeats. It's not like they're just plucking random people from the street or whatever. These are
right, right.
people who are involved in
Sure, sure.
in these issues in some way, and you'll see the same people often over and over again on the episodes. In fact, that one guy, Micah, right? I've seen him pop up as one of the conservatives in a bunch of those videos.
Mm,
So, yeah, I was just thinking earlier on the show when you alluded to this woman, that's an example of someone who could be deported under this, right? Under this constitutional framework.
sure.
But maybe she feels safe now because she is espousing views that mirror the administration's on some level, right? But what if one day there's a president in office who disagrees, who has a different approach? Is she now going to be deported? Now maybe she was a U.S. citizen, maybe she's born here, but let's say she wasn't. Let's say someone wasn't a citizen, right? And again, based on the precedent here, not someone in the U.S. unlawfully. We're not talking about so-called illegal immigrants. We're talking about lawful residents of the U.S., green cards, student visas, and so forth. Imagine you're a lawful permanent resident of the U.S. and you're being deported for statements like that, because for sure, statements that she made, I would consider to be outrageous, and that's being polite. There are words that I want to use that I want stronger than outrageous. I mean, I think my statement to you when I saw that is she's basically a Nazi. And I know that word gets thrown around and people,
Right.
it's a harsh accusation to make, but listen to what she said. She said that, I believe she used the phrase xenophobic nationalism. And that's what she wanted. She said we should be
Sure.
xenophobic nationalists. And
Yeah.
we already have a dominant culture in the US, and that is European. And that's all we should accept in the US. I mean, that really is walking the line of Nazism as far as I'm concerned.
Right. Right. Exactly. Another thing that was really it was it's really disheartening to see was the black guy that was uh defending anti-DEI things, and it's like, wow, dude, you really
Well,
mm. And here's the
yeah,
thing,
a lot of what was happening, it was odd because it seemed like they were all sticking to their talking points, even if,
even when they were debunked.
yeah, and even if it didn't even really answer the claim that was being made, right? Because the way
Right.
they set up, the progressive gentleman will make a claim, and now all of these conservatives are supposed to refute or
Right.
debunk or rebut what he's saying. a lot of them would just come in with their talking points that weren't even really responsive to the point he was making. They just wanted to talk
Right.
about what they wanted to talk about.
Exactly, exactly. And that happened quite often.
Yeah,
And so a lot of it like meandered off of the point to something different. And a couple of times guys were like, "Well, I don't even want to talk about that. I'm going to say
right,
this." It's like, "Well,
right.
that's not what the format. That's not what we're here for."
Yeah. No, I
To
stepped out
give
for a
that
minute.
one guy's credit, he did when it seemed like when he got to the point where he could not defend his argument anymore, he did voluntarily say, "I'm going to tap out and let someone else come in here," because he just wasn't able to.
Right. That was a black dude.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Did you talk about, because I stepped out for a minute, did you talk about the guy who was saying that government agencies get tax breaks for hiring people of color? And he kept saying that.
Right. And he was saying they get tax breaks. Yeah, and Sam Seder, who was the progressive in this
Right.
case, was saying that it's like, what are you talking about? Government agencies don't pay taxes.
Right.
I think, and he kept trying to push that point, saying, "Oh, public or private, they pay taxes." Like they're funded by the taxes. They're not
Yeah.
bringing revenue in. They're not independent businesses. They're funded
Yeah.
by taxes. They have a budget
Government,
to
the
spend.
government, the government taxes you. They they
Right.
give taxes. They don't get taxed. It's like
Right.
I kick ass in court. I don't get my ass kicked in court. This is a one-way street. So
Right.
yeah, like I don't know where that was coming from. I mean, obviously someone had told him that at some point because he was on that. He didn't want to get off of it, even when he was told repeatedly that wasn't the case. Um,
Right. And it's the same. No, keep going. Sorry.
no, it was just that's what you got. You got a lot of people who were spewing misinformation or
Right.
straight up fabrications and dying on those hills.
They were dying on this hills is absolutely correct. So there was another point they were talking about Social Security.
Mm-hmm.
That people were saying they confused this spending of Social Security benefits because it's the largest expenditure that the government spends. And they would confuse that with raising the debt. And Sam Cedar was saying like Social Security does not add to the debt.
Right. By law, it cannot.
By law, it can't add to the
Yeah.
debt. So even if it's the biggest expenditure out there, it's not what's putting us in debt.
Right.
Um, and the money and I know it's demonized for being called an entitlement, but it's an entitlement because you pay into the system, so you are entitled to getting the benefit
Yeah.
out of the system.
Right. Now, also, there was confusion, I think, on both sides about that because you do get more. I know it's capped, right? But you
Right,
get
right,
more if you earned more during your life. And
right.
I don't think that point was acknowledged even by Sam.
No, I don't think it was. He was the point that they kept sticking to was the contribution cap.
Yeah.
Um, and and it's funny, it's like there was a miscommunication between Sam and the guy that he was debating at that point because Sam was saying like I think it was like 6% that everyone pays in 6 something percent, and the guy was saying, "Oh, so you're saying that um Sam's point was that everyone pays the same percentage, but it's capped." And the other guy was saying that, "Oh, so you're saying that um the rich people should have a higher percentage." He's like, "No, they have the same percentage,
Mhm.
but it's capped. So the 6% that they were paying gets cut off. So they don't pay in their full amount of 6% of their income like other people will pay. So they're getting a break off of that." And
Right.
I don't think they actually I think they were kind of missing each other in that understanding, So
Yeah.
for example, if you're making, 100,000 per year, you pay 6% of your income into Social Security, you're paying $6,000. All right. The cap, I think it was, what was it, like 1,200 for, I guess, per payment or something like that. So your payment at $100,000 would get in, but if you're making $1 million a year at 6%, you're not going to pay that $60,000 that
Right.
you should be paying. And so the conservative guy was trying to say that everyone should be paying the same amount, and Sam was saying the same thing, but the cap was what
Yeah.
was
Yeah.
missing for them.
And it's interesting from a sociological point of view, maybe, about how you do have people now on both sides of the ideological spectrum finding some common ground or some common purpose in what they're trying to get at, but they're not
Right.
even able to talk in a reasoned and rational way, or in a way that might lead them to solutions, because they're so captured by their own bubbles that the
Right.
language that they use, the terms that they use, the way they think about these things, the way they approach these subjects are so different that it's like they're living in different worlds. And so even though there is common ground to be found, they can't find it because even their vocabulary is so different.
Right. Yeah. Um, and there was a point that Sam kept saying, he's like, you know, cutting Social Security hurts you too. Like, I don't understand what the problem is, you know?
Yeah. But what was, yeah. I mean, I guess there was some more libertarian views there. Like the one guy was saying that we should just do away with it and tell children to just save up for retirement. And if they don't, that's their problem. That's kind of a crazy way of looking at the world.
Right.
You
And
want
the
to talk
thing
about
is here,
entitlement, by the way, right? That's how entitled can you get?
right. And see the thing, the problem with that is, one, like Sam said, what if they don't do it,
Mhm.
right? And it's not really it is a case of what if they don't, but
What
what
if
if
they
they don't
can't
know
do it?
how? What if they can't,
Yeah, yeah. Who
right?
has that luxury? I mean, that's something you say if you are coming from a place of privilege or entitlement, right? Or like like you're good.
Right.
Maybe you might say that if you got a couple $100,000 in the bank. You know what I mean? But if
Right.
you're struggling paycheck to paycheck, to be like, the system should be you have to have enough to retire, to live off of 65 plus till the day you die. I mean, that's kind of a crazy point of view.
Right. And then on top of that, it's not even it well, I mean, on top of that, what if you can't do it? But if you don't know how to do it,
Mm-hmm.
but if you don't, let's say you're not able to, and a large number of people, we know a large number of people in the United States live paycheck to paycheck, right? It's a very, very high percentage. And so they're going to get to that point and they're not going to be able to do it.
Right.
And so at that point, we're going to have to deal with extreme levels of elderly homelessness. That's going to become a public problem.
Yep.
And ultimately, it's going to become a public financial problem.
Yeah.
So, this is something that helps save money in the long run, protect citizens to some degree, even though people say, even Social Security is not enough to live on, but it does give some to kind of slow down that
Yeah.
homelessness
It's a
for
safety net
elderly.
in some
It's a
instances.
small
Yeah.
sort of safety net.
Yeah.
Um, but ultimately it's put in place to try to better the country and it saves money and it doesn't add to the debt. Like
Right.
it
But it's a
doesn't
good
make any
point.
sense.
It's a good point that you just made, where that guy's attitude was, "Well, it's not my problem." He's like, I'm good. I got
Right,
X dollars. I'm fine. I don't got to worry about it. If you don't have that for your retirement, that's not my problem. But it
right.
would become his problem if,
Yes.
like you said, you had basically every elderly person homeless on the streets. Well, now he's got a problem, right? And I'm sure they'll be complaining at that point. Our government is so inefficient. We can't even stop elder homelessness. Why do we have such a big rampant problem? Because he was the one who was saying that quote unquote entitlement should be taken away.
Right, absolutely. Um, and one thing that happens in this Social Security debate, people are saying, they're like, oh, because they go that argument about, oh, doing your own investment plan or 401k or whatever
Mhm.
in that regard. And they neglect to acknowledge, like the crashes that happened in 2008, and then after that, when people's 401ks were wiped out. Um, what do you do in that situation? People have to start over again. Again, we're thinking about a burden. If your Social Security was still there, you
Well,
know?
What about this idea that I've seen floating around that instead of investing in Social Security, you should just put that money into the S&P 500?
Well, there is, if you did that,
Mm-hmm.
there is I can understand the logic of saying that. First, the problem is that people don't understand how to do that. That
Sure.
should be part of our education. I agree with that. If you put your money in the S&P 500 every year, over 40 years of continuous investing in S&P 500, if you're maxing out, yeah, the calculations are usually done when people are talking about IRAs, Roth IRAs, right? You got a max of like 6,000 a year, 7,000, 8,000, depending on your age. But if you invest consistently at about $6,000 a year over 40 years,
Mm-hmm.
with the average rate of return that the S&P 500 gives, which is between 7 to 10%, and it has been since they started tracking it since the
Right.
20s,
Right.
you would at retirement, you would have, $1 to $2 million. Um, so I can see the merits of that argument.
Yeah.
Um, and that is one of the most sound investing strategies. But here's the thing is it doesn't having Social Security doesn't preclude you from doesn't stop you from doing that on your own.
Right.
The
Right.
reason people don't do it is because we haven't been taught to do it, you
Yeah.
know.
Yeah.
Wasn't
And
something I
it isn't
learned
even
until
even
well into
though
adulthood.
even though on average it has been pretty reliable, especially on the long run, right? It's
Right.
still not guaranteed. It's like you said, there still could be a market crash. It's not federally insured. You know what I mean? It's not a government
Right.
program. This is a
Right.
risk that you're taking by investing in stock. And so,
Right.
maybe on average, as you said, it has a certain expected return, but that isn't the government trying to provide something that you can count on, right? It's something that
Right.
you're gambling with.
I think people should do both, right? We have Social Security, right? This is some measure of a public safety net option,
Mm-hmm.
right? And then, I mean, it's 6%. It's not a huge chunk out of your check.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and if you have anything else, if you want to invest, and you should, then you go into the S&P 500, right?
Right. And that's important to
And
say
then you got
because
two.
it's an option, but it's also one that many people, let's face it, aren't going to be able to access. Like you just said, if you put in $6,000 a year, when people are paycheck to paycheck,
Right.
most of the time they're not going to be able to put in $6,000 a year.
Right. Well, that's just for that calculation, right? To
Yeah.
to to get to, and I forget the off the top, but it's somewhere between 1.2 million and 2 million
Right.
over 40 years because of compound interest, etc. Um, you'd still be better off even if you put like, $1,000 a year or
Right.
$500. You're still going to increase your investment
Right.
over time and have significantly free money, so to speak, at the end of when you're ready to take it out. Everyone
So,
should do it, but we just
yeah,
don't teach people about it.
for those who don't know, that is tied to the top 500 companies, right?
Right.
So that's why they say it's safe for investment. It's kind of like investing in the U.S. economy in a sense, right? Or
Right.
I guess is it U.S. or is it the global economy? Are these just
This is the top 500 U.S.
U.S.
companies.
U.S. companies?
Right. So the
Right.
S&P 500 is top 500.
Right.
So
So it isn't like you're
Benjamin,
just picking a company, like for example, they said, oh well, if you would have invested in Microsoft, you'd be great. It isn't like you're gambling on some unknown company or taking a risk on a certain company. The S&P 500 is always indexed to the top 500 companies, right? So even as those companies change, it's still the top. So your money is always in those top 500 companies.
right. For example, if you invest in Microsoft, you take $1,000 and invest in Microsoft, right? Your $1,000 is tied to how well Microsoft does, up or down,
Right.
which can give you significant
Sure.
returns or whatnot. If you take that same $1,000 and you put it in the S&P 500, that $1,000 is spread across over 500 of the best performing companies in the United States. So
Right.
let's say Microsoft has a bad year, but Apple, Netflix, you know, Ford. I don't know if Ford's in there.
Amazon.
Amazon, these have a good year, then your chance of losing money is buffered by the fact that you've got 500 other companies
Right.
or
And they're
several other
always the top.
sectors.
They're always the top. It's not like, oh, I put my money in a company and now it fell down the list. Your money
Right.
is always in the top 500 companies. So it's really just a matter of, is the market on the whole, or is the economy on the whole doing well?
Right. And so statistically, since the beginning of tracking the S&P 500, and I believe that started sometime in the 20s, um, it's always returned 7%, some say 10%, I'd say in between 7 to 10%, and the economy has only gone up. So it's been one of
On
the
average,
safest
though,
investments.
now
On average,
it
that's a
isn't
very
like
important
every
point.
single year, right? There have been some down years.
Sure, that's a very important point that
Yeah.
on average, so that means over that time period, it has grown, your money would have grown
Right.
7%. Some
Right.
years it could be down 20%. Some years it could be up. Last year it was up 25%,
Yeah. Yeah.
you
And that's
know.
kind of like how real estate tends to appreciate over time. There could be ups and downs in it and whatever, but
Right,
long term, right, it's going to pay off. It's
right.
it's similar, but but again, it's not guaranteed, right? You never know. We could find ourselves in a situation where the economy has long term ill effects that where
Sure.
when you're ready to retire, all of a sudden it's not there.
Right. Historically, it has always gone up,
Yeah.
but yeah, there is that potential. But being in the S&P 500, you're kind of you got kind of a buffer, and you can kind of be. It's one of the safest.
Sure.
Um, and that's kind of what brought us out of COVID. Like, it's not that the whole economy rebounded. It was the tech sector that led us, that put us to those higher highs. Much of the other parts of the economy was still lagging after COVID because of that big drop, but tech was relied on so heavily that it brought everything else up.
Right.
So we even saw gains because of that, because of this other sector. So
Well, look at that. You got stock advice on Nuance. Never know what you're going to get.
yeah. So it was a there was a lot of fundamental misinformation and misunderstandings in
Mhm.
this Jubilee episode, but
But I do love that channel. I still
I
like
do.
those
I do
videos.
like those conversations.
Yeah, yeah. There's been a lot of good ones on that channel.
Yeah, and there's been they've had multiples. They've had, even before the election, they had a Kamala supporter versus Trump supporters, or vice versa, Trump supporter versus Kamala, 20 Christians versus an atheist, um, and having these debates
Where they
around,
have, can you guess the person based on different things? Which is
yeah.
interesting from a sociological point of view, right?
Right.
Like this is not surrounded, but still Jubilee, right? They've got different video series. So
Yeah.
they'll do like can you guess the imposter, where it'll be, I saw one that was Korean people, but one of them was actually, I think she was a white girl, but she actually grew up or spent a lot of time in Korea. And so in some ways she was more Korean than the actual Koreans. And so they had a hard time picking her out, right? Maybe she spoke the language better, she knew the culture better, whatever. But and so these things are also kind of interesting to look at from a sociological point of view.
Yeah, absolutely. And then that's why, I like to watch some of these debates, not just the surround, but then they also have that other middle ground where they
Mm-hmm.
take, um, I think it's they like get four people on one side of an issue and four on a different side, and they pose questions, and then they come together to try to discuss those. They have moderates versus, conservatives, or they'll have, pro social media versus anti social media, Republicans versus Democrats, the variety of things. It's good to have these conversations,
Right.
right? And I think one of the things that's beneficial about it is we tend to all sides, whatever your viewpoint, especially with social media, we tend to kind of shout into the abyss, and are never really confronted with a person on the other side. When you sit down and have this conversation, because largely a lot of these have been civil. I mean, some voices have been raised a bit and some people have been exasperated, but when you're standing in front of someone and have to espouse those views, it takes a lot to go as crazy as people do when they go and post on social media,
Right.
right? Because someone's in your face,
Yeah.
right? You
Yeah.
have to look at that person. You have to see the consequence of the viewpoints that you are pushing on people, right? And I think it's good to have those face-to-face conversations because you put a you put a face, you put a human in your purview when you're trying to maybe put something that's against them. And
Yeah. And I think that effect that you just described, social media being so ubiquitous and so intertwined in our lives now, I think that's a big reason why we've become so divided and polarized and we've retreated into our own spaces, right? Because we've lost that human interaction, that human touch. um, I remember back in the day when I was growing up, they used to say you don't even talk to people about politics because it was like one of those taboo subjects that people could argue about. It was like politics and religion, right? But I think when you had social media come up, all of a sudden that was gone. And by the way, I'm not saying that you shouldn't, right? Maybe that's actually a positive side effect of social media, the fact that people are talking more about it, but it's the way that these conversations are happening. I think having that face to face interaction is important because
sure.
that does temper things a little bit. That allows you to get to the nuance, to try to find the common ground, to empathize with the other side, see them as a person, right? If it's just
Absolutely.
being online shouting, into the void, you're really not getting anywhere, and you're causing, I think, further division, and that's playing out, I think, increasingly so, cycle by cycle in our politics.
Right, right. I think yeah, that's it's so necessary.
Yeah,
And social media, I'm not one that generally demonizes social media. I think it's great, but it can push people into bubbles because the way the algorithm works is they're going to show you things that they think that you like. And so you're hardly ever confronted with an opposing view
right.
unless you seek it out. And so you think that everyone thinks like you. And so it reinforces, even if it's an incorrect view, it'll reinforce that.
Yeah,
And that can become an issue.
sure. And then if someone says something that doesn't exactly fit that narrative that you think everyone has because it's what your algorithm is showing you, they're then looked at as so diametrically opposed to
Right.
everything you stand for, right? Like I hate you and everything you stand for, even if maybe they're not. Maybe they're actually saying a lot of things you would agree with, but they're not
Right.
saying it in those terms. They're not looking at it exactly the way you are,
Right.
because you're bombarded with messages that echo your own views, right? Anything
Right.
that's outside of that all of a sudden looks crazy, looks insane, right? It looks like something that needs to be shut down immediately because how could you not hold that one true opinion? And that's a very dangerous thing.
Right. And I think the good side of it, which may not be talked about as much, is and there's a double-edged sword there, is that people who do feel maybe they're in areas, environments where their viewpoint is isolated or the way they feel about themselves is isolated. With the diversity on social media, people can find their tribe or
Yeah.
they can find and identify with people that are going through the same types of things that they might be going through, and that is a positive thing. The double-edged sword of that is that people who have these very minuscule or small views can find other people who have them and turn that into a movement
Right.
that can be detrimental.
And then the
So there's a
fringes amplified.
right,
Yeah. And just as an example, I saw one a few years back now when Andrew Cuomo won re-election as governor in New York, right? Just to see how deep into these bubbles people get. Someone on my feed said she screamed at the TV when she saw he was reelected. She did not know one single person who voted for him, and yet he
mm,
won with a comfortable majority of New York votes. Right, so it shows you. I mean, obviously, she's not talking to a lot of different people. She's just talking to people in her own bubble, but that's dangerous, right? Because that's what leads to things like people thinking elections are stolen, because it just doesn't
Sure.
make sense to them. Like everyone that they
Right.
know and hear from voted this way, so how can another person possibly win?
Right. Absolutely. And I think on a, on a related and kind of a macro level, um, that's what happens when we don't have uh, a mixing of the different cultures in the country,
Mm-hmm.
right? If you've only grown up in one group and you've not mixed or met with people from other groups, I mean, there are people we've seen who say, "Oh, I never met a black person until I was like 16," right? Oh, I don't know any you know, I don't know any Mexican people or Jewish people. So if you've never had that actual interaction, you never had that experience, you're going to believe things that most people might think are far out because you've never had that experience, right? If you've never met a person, a Mexican person, and all you're seeing and everyone around you is saying that Mexican people are this, this, and this, well, you have nothing to refute it other than what you might see in algorithms showing you something, your friends and family are
Right.
telling you something. So it's kind of the same thing.
Yeah,
Create,
it is. And that's why I'm so grateful that I went to schools in Queens. I went to very diverse New York City public schools.
right.
Right. It got to be in that environment. And unfortunately, now what I'm seeing, I think largely due to social media, unfortunately, is even in a place like New York, the culture is changing. I mean, and maybe for better and for worse. I'm not saying it's all bad, but it seems like things are being more homogenized in a sense
Mm,
because New York used to have a very certain character and culture to it. And the same could be said for a lot of other places too. But now when you go on social media and everyone is kind of commenting on everything and maybe you're in your ideological bubbles or whatever, but you're not necessarily in the same geographical location, right? So you're starting to interact with people from all over. And so you're starting to lose a little bit, I think, of what made a place distinct, even, right? Because the culture is so influenced by social media now.
that's definitely the conversation to have, I think. You know, I think in some ways though, that's also good because you see outside of the bubble. Um,
Sure.
because
It's a double-edged sword.
I've noticed someone I've noticed New Yorkers have a bubble of their own, with this idea that New York is the end all be all of everything, and that anything that happens in New York is automatically should be applied to everywhere else in the world,
It's
or in the
kind of
country.
it's kind of true though. I mean, New York is the greatest city in the country, and so
It's nah, stop that, stop that.
it
So,
definitely is. I mean, it's certainly the most important one, and so
oh, stop that.
we've acknowledged that on this show multiple times that New York City is the most
I've
important city in the U.S.
not the most important. I'm saying
Where the most
it is
people
an
are.
important.
No, it's
It is.
certainly the most. It's the most populated city in the U.S. It's the economic engine, right?
I think that a lot of the economics go through there, because of
Sure.
Wall Street and this and that. But
Right. It's the center of culture and entertainment and food, right? I
are
mean,
you discounting LA and Atlanta, Nashville? Like,
oh,
come
I
on.
would say those are all good cities as well, but they're not on the level of New York City. You're going to call Nashville the most important city in the U.S.? I got love for Nashville.
No, you said you were talking about this, culture and things like that.
New York has
Nashville is
more of
the
it.
biggest country music city in the
Okay.
nation, and has been for decades.
And
That
that's
is,
very cute. That is very cute. But New York is still, it's hard
oh, they're
to
gonna come
deny.
for you.
It's hard to deny the importance of New York City
I'm
to
not
the
denying the
world.
importance of New York City. I'm
Well,
saying that
I'm putting it
not
on the level
denying the
of a
importance of
second
other
tier
cities.
city. Right, but those cities are not on the level of New York City. And I don't think they would say that they are.
You don't think LA at the very least?
LA is number two. Chicago is number three.
Okay, okay, okay.
Look at the population. Look at the numbers. I mean, I was reading recently that Brooklyn, I think, would be one of the largest economies in the U.S. if it was its own state. So, and that's just one of the boroughs
Yeah. Um, but I don't think California's got a higher GDP than New York. What are you talking about?
as a state, but we're talking about cities now.
Oh, yeah, okay, it's a
Yeah,
city. I don't know about LA.
yeah,
Um, I have to look that up.
yeah,
Um,
yeah. But yeah, and that's what I mean. You would see certain things. that
Like,
we kind of understood, or at least as New Yorkers, we kind of had a certain mentality about, specifically around diversity, right? And the fact that we have
right,
so many different cultures here, we celebrate each other's differences even, and we're all kind of in this together. Then you see certain
right,
things on social media, maybe it's a more southern point of view or from other parts of the country mixed in, and suddenly
right.
even in New York the culture changes a little bit when it comes to that, right? I think it kind of makes people retreat more to their own ethnic enclaves. When I was growing up, that wasn't as much. Of course, it was always there, but it wasn't as bad, I don't think, as it is now. And I think social media does play a role in that to some degree.
Sure, sure. This list is trash. This has got to be completely wrong. This
Is it a
doesn't make
pizza
any
list or
sense.
something? What are you looking at?
No, I was looking up a list of cities by GDP. Um,
Okay.
and oh no, this is a okay, never mind. This is a I'm I was looking at it and it's listed in alphabetical order because I'm like, it's got Abilene, Texas as the top city in the States. And I'm like, that's not even possible. What's going on here? Yeah. So official this is a world list, but we can look at the states. So New York is number one, Tokyo's number two, Los Angeles is number three, then Paris and London.
So you're saying New York is number one, not just in the US, but in the world?
By GDP,
Well, there you
it
go.
yes. Yeah.
So it's the most important city in the whole world by some measure.
Well, I don't know if I'd go as far as most important. It's not
Economically
the
speaking,
yeah. And it's not the most populous city in the
no,
in the world.
but it is in
But
the US.
in the US, yes.
Yes, it is.
Um, because you're counting in the metro area.
No, you're not. You're counting just the five boroughs of New York City.
Well, this here is showing the metro area.
All right, but look at just the city itself.
Oh, wait, hold on, hold on. Hold on, hold on. This is counting New York, Newark, Jersey City,
That's the metro.
New
We're not
York,
talking about
New
that.
Jersey, Pennsylvania, and they're calculating that as one GDP. So I'm
No,
gonna have to find a different list.
I'm
Uh,
talking about now just population of the city itself. New York is number one. LA is number two. Chicago is number three in the country.
well, I was looking at GDP, but it showed
All right.
population here. But this list is counting Jersey City and PA. Like, yeah, this doesn't count.
So the bottom line
Anyway,
of this is, I think, yeah, it's the other way. It should go in the other direction. I think other places should be more inspired by New York as opposed to every.
no, I don't know about that.
Yeah, and by the way, you come to New York if you want to experience the New York life, but we do inspire the country, right? I mean, hip hop started in the Bronx. We all know this.
Yeah, sure. I'm not denying that. But to say that everyone should follow New York's example, yeah, absolutely not. Are you kidding me? And
Culturally,
are you kidding me?
used to
Not
be.
culture. Look at economically. Look at you're gonna pay $6,000 for a closet in Manhattan? That's ridiculous. Like, come on.
No, I'm not talking about that.
That's in New York. That's what's happening in New York. Like, come on.
But that's the price you pay for being in New York. So you wouldn't want to pay that to be in Nashville, right?
Why would you pay that to be in New York? That's not
Well,
a
it's
good
the great. We
example.
just established it's the greatest city, not just in the U.S. but in the world.
It's okay. It's
we
okay.
just we just looked at the numbers, objectively speaking, right?
It's
It's
okay. I've been in better cities. I've been in better cities. New York is cool. I like
objectively,
it.
you have not.
Honolulu is a much better city to me.
Oh no, it's not. Maybe
Are
to
you kidding?
maybe to you, but
Honolulu's a much better city.
not to
The
the.
weather is better. Are you kidding? The weather's better. There's the scenery is better. There's sky. There's actually sky that you can see.
Yeah,
Like, come on. So
nah, New York.
anyway,
Yeah,
so bubbles can be bad. That's the
right.
bottom line here.
And by the way, speaking of bubbles, really quick, I do want to mention how ridiculous it is that Mayor Adams, speaking of New York City, right here we go, to tie these things together. Mayor Adams has put himself in such a bubble now that he is
Mm,
saying he does not read the papers or watch the news for the past 4 weeks.
that's ridiculous.
How are you the mayor of the biggest city in the US and you don't know what's going on in the news? And he's saying he's doing that for his own personal peace because he was asked if Cuomo was getting under his skin. He said, how can he get under his skin? I don't even know what he's saying. I don't watch the news or read the papers. He's like, it's much more peaceful that way. So he is running for re-election as mayor of New York City without paying attention to what's going on in the world around him. That
Do you
is,
believe that though? Do you believe that though?
I do believe it, and I give it the rubber chicken of the week.
I don't believe it. I think he's watching. I think he's saying that because it just gives this tries to give off this this image that, you know, I'm unbothered, right?
Oof.
Aloof. Yeah, like
Adams, I don't think so.
you've been in you've run campaigns, you've been a part of many campaigns. You know that they're paying attention.
Under normal circumstances, they would be. But when things are looking this bad for him, I mean, he basically is running a campaign like an ostrich with his head buried under the sand, right? I mean, that is consistent with how he's running. He's running as if he's not losing. This reminds me of, believe it or not, when Mario Cuomo ran for mayor against Ed
Mm.
Koch and the incumbent Abe Beame. Now, this was before my time, but I know about it. Let's get the year on that. Was that 77? We can look this up. We can ask Google because Abe Beame was the incumbent and he finished in third place behind two challengers. Now I'm looking to see how history repeats itself this year because Adams is not winning this primary. My question is, what place does he come in? I don't think he makes second place. I don't even know if he makes third place at this point. If I'm a challenger now for mayor, I'm going to see how much better I can do than the incumbent. I mean, that would be a good victory in itself for some of these candidates who weren't going to win, right? But what if they can say they
Mhm.
actually got more votes than the mayor?
Right, right. 1977. You were right on that.
77. Yeah.
Yeah.
So history is repeating itself in that regard, right? I don't know why he is still running, but if he was reading the papers, he probably wouldn't be.
I think he's reading the papers. I think it's just stubbornness. I think you know, he's probably seeing if he can pull it off. Probably seeing if his new buddies can give him a little help, you know.
Well,
So-
on that point, really quickly, also, I wanted to mention we had a conversation here about would the mayor push back on the administration at all? And
right.
when asked about this topic, so we'll bring it full circle, the topic about the deportation, right, of the Columbia student, he said, we believe in free speech here in New York City. However, the issue of deportation is left to the federal government, not us. And that was it.
That's the type of answer that we said that he would be giving when faced with some sort
Right.
of criticism of the administration.
Right.
That's one of those, you know, really political answers. That wasn't an outright, you know, opposition to what was happening,
Right. Right. So he
which he
wasn't really
might have
pushed
said
back.
before.
Sure. Sure. I
Right?
think before he might have said, we disagree with the administration on this, at least.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Like to his credit, before when a lot of people were attacking him and New York City for providing for the migrants that came in, he was very defiant in saying things like, you know, New York is a city of a variety of people. We stand with, you know, this diversity. He was very, very outspoken in that regard. This is not that type of answer.
No, no. So, yeah, I guess we'll see if he ever does push back against the administration. So far, we're not counting that as pushing back, though.
So quickly before we end
Yeah.
off here, we did have the poll from last week, and the poll from
Oh,
last week,
forgot about that. Okay.
yeah, was do you believe the conditions at Rikers are beyond repair? So we talked last week about the judge, I believe it's Laura Taylor Swain, who is deciding about these two proposals. One is the for there to be this conservatorship, basically government or court taking over, or you know, the city wants to have more control, despite nothing really changing at Rikers. There's been at least 35 deaths in the past since 2022. There's been no significant change. Actually, conditions have gotten worse. And so, sorry, not conservatorship, receivership. Sorry. Yeah, right. And so we pose this question, you know, is Rikers beyond repair? Do you believe that they're beyond repair? And so we didn't get a lot of participation in this poll this time. And we kind of speculated that might be because Rikers is a very regional uh, topic. But
Yeah, and also, even if you're in New York City, you have to have some kind of experience with Rikers to be able to answer that.
Right. So, 33% said yes, they believe conditions are beyond repair, and 67% said no. Um, the comments didn't really, there was only a couple of comments. They didn't really add to any sort of discourse here. One person said, now that there's effectively zero chance Trump will be sent to Rikers, I'm all for fixing it up. And then someone said, pretty sure Elon needs to do a personal inspection, a very lengthy one. So there's more kind of troll commentary, but
Happiness. Yeah. All right.
yeah. So the majority of people think it's not beyond repair,
Yeah.
which, you know, I think we kind of agree, but it's going to take a significant change in the system
Well,
versus just moving it around.
yeah, that's the thing. Like, how can it or any place really be beyond repair? Of course, there are things you could do to fix it, but this idea that you have to close it is symbolic. It's a band-aid solution if you're not getting at what the real issues are,
Right.
right? So for people who say it's beyond repair, just close it. And then what? You pop up more jails who also have the same problem. Why would it magically be better, right? So
Right.
thinking should always be, how do we improve the system, as opposed to just, let's shut down a facility and open up a new one somewhere else. That's,
Right. And
the idea of moving. You're depressed with your situation in life, so you move. Maybe that helps on a superficial level, but you still have you're taking you with you where you go, right? So whatever issues you had,
right.
are still going to be there.
Right. It's clearly a systemic issue because I know I'm very much oversimplifying it, but I do think to some degree it's this simple. It takes basically a phone call to say, stop doing what you're doing, right? If you're violating prisoners' rights, stop it. Hold those people accountable that are doing it so that everyone knows that this is no longer acceptable, right? If conditions are bad, then you got to get in there and revamp some of the place. I'm sure that there's infrastructure is not that good. It needs revival, right? If prisoners aren't in safe conditions, fix it. It simply is a phone call in that regard. It doesn't seem like, to me, it doesn't seem like they want to do it. It seems like it's something that's intentional.
I mean, yes, to a degree. I think it's a little reductive to say it's a simple phone call to fix things like a lack of accountability in the system, for example. I mean, some of that might need to be legislated, right? There are certain things that need to be done. Some of it might be a matter of hiring or looking at some of these contracts. There's a lot that goes into this, right? So I don't think it's necessarily
It's
simple.
oversimplifying,
Right, right. But
but
in philosophy, I think your point is valid. That it's a matter of deciding to want to do it and then doing it.
right. I mean, if the problem is, if one of the problems is that guards are too aggressive and they're violating their rights, well, the simple solution, the simple fix is from the top down, make sure they're held accountable when they cross that line.
Make sure they're held
And
accountable. Make sure you're hiring better people, right? Make sure you can fire the
right,
people you need to fire. Make
yeah,
sure you're doing all
set
of
a
it.
line and say, listen, this is what we've been doing so far. This is no longer acceptable. We're done with that.
Right.
I mean, it's
But the city has been held in contempt for not addressing these issues. And so
right.
now we're in that situation where, what do we do? Right. That's why
Right.
receivership is on the table
Yeah,
and the court will have to decide it. But I do think that this is a big systemic problem. So it goes beyond
absolutely.
just some of these quick fixes that people talk about. I mean, it's all of the above, but
Yeah,
the right to a speedy trial, for example, right? Why are people
right.
held on Rikers for such a long period of time without seeing their day in court, right?
Right. I think that's a more difficult fix
Yeah,
because the just the sheer numbers of people that could add to this backlog, right? It's not mistreatment, bad facilities. I think that's something that can be fixed much easier.
but is it a resources issue then? If you want to get trial,
Mistreatment can't be it's yeah.
no, if you want to get people their day in court a lot faster, is that
Right.
about having more court resources, more judges, maybe more courtrooms? I don't know.
Something, yeah.
Yeah.
That I think that would take probably a little bit more doing, because like you said, judges, you can't just like, pull judges up off of the street,
Yeah.
right? There has to be some criteria there. There's some length of time before someone can make it to becoming having the qualifications to be a judge. Um, you know, it could be a resource issue in that way. It could be, case logs. It could be a facilities issue, right? I mean, there are only so many courtrooms that can be, and
Right.
maybe there's a way you have to think about that. Okay, maybe these have to be done via remote Zoom like we were doing during the pandemic, so then you don't have the physical location limitation, and maybe you can get through more
Or
judges.
do you need more public defenders, more attorneys, right?
Right.
Because maybe you don't have enough of
Sure.
them, and that's why cases are slow too, because the lawyers
Yeah.
are busy.
We already know that public defenders are swamped. They're overworked. They have caseloads that are incredible. So, and that's an issue that can't be fixed overnight, right? You can't just all of a sudden go and say, "Hey, you want to be a lawyer? You want to be a public defender?" Like they're
In some states, and New York doesn't do this, right? But in some states, they actually require lawyers to take on cases. Like they'll just assign a lawyer a case like that, even if they
right.
don't even do that, right? They became a lawyer to whatever else, right? Work in the
Mhm.
public sector, work for some corporation or somewhere else in the government, whatever it is, right? They want to start their own practice doing parking tickets. I don't know, whatever they wanted to do, divorces, you name it. But
Right.
the state will come in and say, no, we have a shortage here. We're going to assign you this case. You got to defend this person now. New York doesn't do that. You know what I mean? But I've heard of some of my friends in other states being assigned cases by the state like that.
Listen, I'm putting it out there. I am volunteering to judge some of these Rikers cases to help with the backlog. Um,
Go to law
Not a lawyer.
school.
Haven't been to law school. I'm not a lawyer, but I don't think
that's
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 specifically a criteria.
that's step
Uh,
one.
I don't think that's specifically a criteria.
Yeah,
I think
because then we're talking about violating the rights in a whole different way, right? Having their
I'm
cases
just
adjudicated
saying
by
this is,
non-lawyers, non-judges.
you know, you know, I think we're probably in a gray area there. Like the Speaker of the House in Congress doesn't necessarily have to be an elected official. So I think we can do the same with judges.
No, we cannot. And that is
Yeah.
going to be my bottom line. Let us respect our foundational principles, right?
Sure.
Before we can even get to that point of finding common ground in places where we think we may be able to. But like we said, sometimes the vocabularies are different. We're in different bubbles. We want to be able to get through that. I think the first step, the very first step, is having that solid foundation, right? It's like building a floor that we can all walk on before we can then have a meeting space, right? If there's no floor, then we're not going to have a place to meet. And so let's do that first, right? And that starts with, I think, respecting our Constitution, our right to free speech, all these things that are foundational to our democracy and our society must be respected before we can expect us as a society to be able to get anywhere.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I agree with that. And that does remind me um, of the petition and the tenets that we were running back in 2011.
Stop.
Solid ground. Yeah.
Yeah, you're right. You're right.
Yeah. So it's been quite consistent in that regard with
Yeah,
the ideologies.
absolutely.
So people can find us on YouTube at Nuance Show, Instagram, and everywhere podcasts are available. Again, we welcome comments and debates and the ideas to have these nuanced discussions. So yeah, let us know what you're thinking and feeling.
Yes, as always, thank you all for joining us. We've got work to do, and we'll catch you next time.